these whispered narrative details, the more principled institutions of the national and New York media, the Times, Vanity Fair, were bound ethically and legally to denature their reporting into broad, colorless parables on adolescent pharmaceutical abuse. Most of these outlets simply dropped the stories and moved on. In September 2010, The Atlantic published a long and strangely glib feature on the role of study drugs in these pressure cooker country clubs, but it made only a passing reference to the series of events at Kennedy that had precipitated it. 3 months earlier, Gawker had posted direct excerpts of the Facebook chat that would become known across the constellation of Northeastern boarding schools as the Kennedy thread. But even Gawker's editors had the sense to pixelate the names and tiny square profile pictures of the 4 students who'd written it. Those 4, at that point, as their parents' lawyers made abundantly clear, still enjoyed the legal protection afforded to minors on matters of privacy. I'll note here that my own place in this narrative is necessarily peripheral. When I arrived at Kennedy as a new sophomore in the fall of 2010, 7 months had passed since Foster Dade had been expelled. The last of the more resolute reporters still sometimes appeared on the porch of Brennan House, where I lived, as if by standing there long enough they might absorb by osmosis the ambient unknowns. I first heard the earliest shards of Foster's story that October. There is an untraceable magic to the boarding school ethos, to those hermetic little kingdoms illuminated by the sparkling mythological tendencies of adolescence. This is especially true at night, after 11 p.m. lights out, when boys hustle noiselessly down the hallways into the bedroom of whoever's been ordained as the nocturnal host. I was never ballsy or popular enough to be this person. When I showed up, I'd huddle in the corner under the window, enchanted but mostly silent. We were still proximate enough to the events surrounding Foster Dade's expulsion for the truth to be more or less intact, albeit the flexible truth of second-hand accounts. We were second years, in Canadian parlance. My hallmates had been first years during the events in question, cushioned from direct access to upperclassmen politics. The boys a year ahead of us in Brennan tended to regard us with bored disinterest, but every so often a few would join us late at night, and when the conversation turned to the previous spring, they seemed to revel in their relative authority. Yet their contributions only seemed to give new dimensional edges to the vastness of the vacancies around it, illuminating the widening chasm between us and this story's recession into the past. I would spend my 3 years at Kennedy in the half-paralysis of my own vague sense of unbelonging, lacking that innate interior alchemy that would allow me to push myself from the ranks of the supporting cast. This was fine, I told myself at the time. I wrote a couple of news stories for the Canadian and managed to avoid any controversy. I did well enough in my classes to get into a college that has subsequently crept its way into the U.S. News and World Report's top 13. I did go to my 5-year reunion this past May, however anxiously, and my classmates told me that I was doing interesting things, albeit with the loosely patronizing surprise reserved for those formerly deemed uninteresting. I am still bitter sometimes, but mostly I covet a wistfulness that was foreclosed to me. And so I listened that first autumn in silence as mythology found shape in the chasms between and beyond its originating facts, and I began to privately curate what truths I could. The characters in question were at that point just 2 years above us, but I was wide-eyed enough to see them as somehow older and more transcendent than 17. Their sex more profound, their travails cast in a certain unintelligible luster of romance. Whether the grim sadness that trailed over them was only the imagined consequence of the stories shared late at night seemed beside the point. I would watch that winter as Annabeth Whittaker and Porter Roth and Sophie Cohen wordlessly made their way into Vito's, the pizza parlor across the village main street beyond the campus gates, stepping into the yellow light from the cold Wednesday night. I looked for secrets in their faces, chapped and pink from the